My stepmother called me useless on my father's deathbed, then screamed when she heard his last wishes. My name is Jenna, I'm 26 years old, quiet by nature, and I've always loved painting more than people. My mother passed away when I was 10, and my dad remarried 2 years later. That's when she came into our lives, Monica. Monica was the kind of woman who smelled like expensive perfume and talked like she owned every room she walked into. At first, I tried to like her. I really did, but she made it clear from day one that I was just a leftover from my dad's old life. The way she looked at me, like I was some wild animal her husband had dragged into the house, told me everything I needed to know. Still, I kept my head down. I wasn't loud or rebellious. I just focused on school, my art, and spending as much time with my dad as I could. He was the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered. And even though Monica always rolled her eyes when he complimented my sketches or bought me new brushes, he never stopped being proud of me. But things got harder when Dad got sick. It started with stomach pain, then weight loss, then the endless hospital visits. In just 7 months, my father, my only real parent, was confined to a hospital bed with tubes running through him, his voice no stronger than a whisper. And Monica, she acted like it was the biggest inconvenience in the world. She didn't cry, she didn't pray, she just sighed. A lot. Oh please, she told me one night, as I sat beside him. You're wasting your time, he's not gonna make it. And when he goes, this house is mine. I didn't respond, not because I was weak, but because I was storing every word, every sneer, every insult. She started locking the bedroom that used to be mine, told me I was old enough to figure it out on my own, so I slept on the couch, or in my car when I had to. My dad found out one day, and cried so hard, the nurse had to give him something to calm down. I lied and told him I was fine, that I was just busy with work. Then came the night he asked me to bring a lawyer. Make sure she's not around, he whispered. I did what he said, quietly, secretly. I found a lawyer and brought her to the hospital. Dad gave her some papers, looked me in the eyes and said, no matter what happens, promise me you'll follow what's in here. I nodded. I promised. The next morning, he took a turn for the worse. By the time we rushed into the room, the doctors said it was a matter of hours. Monica stood by the bed with her arms crossed, not a tear in sight. Should have taken better care of yourself, she mumbled. I knelt beside him, held his hand, whispered that I loved him. And then, when I asked for a moment alone with him, she refused. You? What's the point? You've always been useless, she said loudly. He's dying, and you couldn't even finish college. He wasted his time on you. The room went dead silent. Then, without even turning his head, my father's voice came out hoarse, but strong enough to stop every sound in the room. Monica, he said, you should sit down. The lawyer is on her way. She blinked. Why? She asked, confused. Why now? He gave me a weak smile. Because it's time she learns what useless really means. And that's when the door opened, and the lawyer walked in, holding a brown folder that would change everything Monica thought she knew. She stared at it like it was a ticking bomb, and I didn't say a word. I just smiled. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the air conditioner above Dad's hospital bed. The nurse had just left after checking his vitals, and I was still sitting beside him, holding his hand, my fingers trembling from what just happened. My stepmother, Janice, had finally shown her true colors when she called me useless, right in front of a man who gave me everything. I looked at Dad. His eyes were half closed, but I knew he was still with us. His breathing was shallow, but his fingers gripped mine a little tighter, like he was trying to tell me he heard everything. I leaned in closer and whispered, "It's okay, Dad. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Just then, Janice came back into the room, holding a small cup of coffee and her phone, acting like nothing had just happened. Her face was calm, too calm, like she hadn't just insulted me on his deathbed. She pulled up a chair and sat on the other side of him, scrolling through her phone, like she was waiting for a train and not watching her husband fade away. "Any change?" she asked without looking up. I said nothing. That's when the lawyer walked in. His name was Mr. Langley. He was old, with thin gray hair and glasses that always seemed to slide down his nose. He looked around the room, and nodded at me, then gave Janice a tight smile. "I came as soon as I could," Your father insisted on going over some things in person before he trailed off and cleared his throat. Janice stood up quickly. Now? Is that really necessary? He's barely awake. Mr. Langley looked at her calmly. He asked for this, Janice. And as his attorney, I'm here to honor his wishes. Dad's fingers squeezed mine again. I nodded and said softly, he's ready. The lawyer pulled a few papers out of his leather folder and sat down. Your father and I went over these documents last week, but he wanted to make a few changes today. It'll only take a moment. Janice let out an annoyed sigh and folded her arms. Mr. Langley leaned over and spoke gently to my father. James, are you ready? Dad nodded ever so slightly. His voice was raspy but clear. Yes. What followed was something I never saw coming. Mr. Langley began reading out Dad's wishes. To my wife Janice, I leave the beach house in Fairport and the blue SUV. Janice smirked and nodded like she expected more. To my daughter, Miss Langley continued, I leave the family estate in Sunvale Hills, the bank accounts under my name, the art collection, and all business shares. Janice's head snapped up. What? She said sharply. What did you just say? Mr. Langley didn't flinch. The estate, bank accounts, art and business shares all go to his daughter April. I couldn't speak. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would come out of my chest. Janice's face turned red. That's not possible. That's not what we discussed. You said, he said, we had an agreement. Mr. Langley simply replied, he changed his will last week. Janice, everything is legally signed and witnessed. She turned to Dad, her voice shaking. James, how could you do this to me, after everything I've done for you? Dad opened his eyes, just a little wider and whispered, you showed me who you really are. Janice stepped back, like she'd been slapped. There was silence. I sat frozen, unable to believe what I had just heard. My father, the man I thought had been blind to all of Janice's games, had seen everything, and he had made sure I would be protected. Janice's breathing got louder, her lips were trembling. You can't do this to me. This isn't right. I gave up everything to be with you. Mr. Langley calmly replied, I suggest you speak to your own lawyer, Janice. But the paperwork is solid. And then, something unexpected happened. Janice suddenly screamed and picked up the glass of water beside Dad's bed. She threw it across the room, shattering it against the wall. The nurse rushed in, followed by a security guard, who had been stationed near the entrance due to hospital protocol, for end-of-life patients with high-profile wills. She's having a moment, I whispered to the nurse. Maybe give her a second outside. Janice looked around wildly, like she realized the walls were closing in. This isn't over, April. She growled at me. I didn't flinch. No, Janice. This is over. She stormed out of the room, and I heard her heels clacking all the way down the hall. The room grew calm again, with only the quiet hum of machines and the soft wheeze of Dad's breath. I turned to him. His lips curled into the tiniest smile, and then, he closed his eyes. The monitor beeped slower and slower. I held his hand, tears falling down my face. Then the monitor went flat. The nurse leaned in. He's gone. I sobbed quietly but nodded. He waited. He wanted to see it done. The nurse gently touched my shoulder. He loved you very much. Mr. Langley stood and placed the will back into his folder. I'll take care of everything from here. Take your time. I stayed beside my father's bed, for what felt like an hour. I held his hand, whispered my thanks, and told him how proud I was to be his daughter. But I also knew something else. This wasn't the end, because Janice wasn't done, and neither was I. And as I walked out of that hospital room, my heels clicking softly against the tile, I made myself a promise. The revenge Dad started, I was going to finish it, and I knew exactly how. The day of the funeral came fast. The church was filled with people in black, but their faces were a blur to me. I sat in the front row, dressed in a plain black dress, clutching the only photo I had of Dad and me, taken before Janice ever came into our lives. I stared at the photo through watery eyes, while the pastor spoke kind words about my father. His voice faded in and out, like I was underwater. I barely noticed Janice walk in. She was late. She wore a fancy black gown that sparkled under the stained glass light, her blonde curls pinned up like she was attending an award show, and not burying her husband. Her face was still red from crying, but I could tell, it wasn't sadness, it was rage. She took a seat on the other side of the front row, not beside me, Not that I wanted her to. After the service, we walked out to the cemetery. The wind blew through the trees, soft and cold. I stood by the grave as they lowered Dad's casket into the ground. My knees shook, but I didn't cry. Not this time. I had cried enough. Janice threw a single white rose in after the casket, and walked off before the dirt even touched the wood. That night, I returned to the Sunvale Hills estate. It was mine now. My father's will had made that clear. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stood in the grand foyer, and looked around. The paintings still hung on the walls, the floors still shined, but it didn't feel like home yet, not without him. I made my way upstairs to the room Dad had used as his office. It was still locked. I pulled out the key the lawyer had given me, and turned it slowly. The door creaked open. Everything was exactly as he left it. Stacks of books, old records, framed pictures, and folders, dozens of folders. I opened one. Inside were papers, photographs, and receipts. At first glance, they looked boring. Legal documents, maybe. But then I saw Janice's name on the top of several of them. One paper showed a money transfer, $5,000, to a man named Trevor Baines. There were more, $10,000, $3,000, over and over, all to the same man. I blinked, confused. Who was this man? Why was Dad sending him money? I turned the page. This time, it wasn't Dad's name on the sender's line, it was Janice, and the money was leaving Dad's accounts. My stomach twisted. She had been taking his money, and worse, she had been hiding it. There was even a document showing she'd tried to transfer one of Dad's smaller companies into someone else's name. It had been blocked, probably by Dad himself. When he found out, I couldn't breathe. I knew Janice was greedy. I knew she didn't love him. But this was theft, fraud, and I had the proof. I sat back in Dad's old leather chair, heart racing, mind spinning. But I wasn't going to the police, not yet. I had a better idea. An idea that would make Janice pay, not just legally, but socially, emotionally, publicly. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. The next morning, I drove out to the edge of town, where a small brick building sat between a diner and a hardware store. A faded sign read, Lou Chambers, Private Investigations. Lou was an old friend of my father's. I'd met him once when I was a teenager, back when Dad was dealing with a blackmail threat from a former business partner. Lou had solved it in a week. I knocked on the door. Come in, a voice said. Lou was still the same, bald, thick mustache, sharp eyes. He looked me over and nodded. You're James's girl, he said. I nodded. I need your help. He raised a brow. Something tells me this ain't about grief. I dropped the folder of documents on his desk. He opened it and whistled. This is bad. She's been stealing from him, I said. For years. Looks like it. I want to destroy her, I said, voice low. I want everyone to know what she did. I want to ruin her the way she tried to ruin me. Lou leaned back. That's a dangerous game. I'm not scared. He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Then let's play. That was the beginning of the plan. We spent the next 2 weeks gathering more evidence. Lou had ways of pulling information I couldn't. Emails, text messages, even phone calls. He showed me how Janice had been planning to sell off one of Dad's properties under a fake name, how she lied to business partners, and worst of all, how she had been cheating on my father for years with the man named Trevor Baines, the same man who now lived in a fancy apartment in a different state, paid for by stolen money. It all made sense now. Janice's fake tears, her over-the-top grief, the way she screamed when the will was read. She wasn't mourning a husband, she was mourning her lost fortune, and I had all the proof. Now I just needed the right stage. Lou helped me organize everything into a file. We called it the Widow's Web, and I planned to deliver it during the charity gala Janice had scheduled in my father's name, a fake event where she pretended to care about his legacy, just to collect donations from his wealthy friends. The guest list was packed. Business partners, investors, old friends, the press, and Janice had no idea I'd be attending. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror in a black dress that belonged to my mother. I'd found it buried in one of Dad's old boxes. He kept it all these years. I wore it like armor. When I arrived, all eyes turned to me. Some smiled, others whispered. Janice stood near the bar, laughing with an older man in a gray suit. When she saw me, her smile dropped. What are you doing here? She hissed, storming toward me. You weren't invited. I know, I said calmly. But I brought something everyone here needs to see. Then I nodded to Lou, who stood at the back, near the tech booth. He gave me a thumbs up, and tapped his tablet. The projector behind Janice flickered to life, and suddenly, the screen filled with words and images, bank statements, emails, a photo of her kissing Trevor outside a hotel. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Janice spun around and gasped. "No," she whispered, "turn it off." But Lou didn't. The video kept playing. Evidence, proof, and finally, a video clip of my father, recorded just a week before his death, saying, "If you're watching this, it means Janice fooled you." But she didn't fool me. The crowd gasped. Janice covered her mouth, and then she screamed. Janice's scream echoed across the ballroom, sharp and wild like a siren. All heads turned toward her, the lights from the projector still flashing behind her like a spotlight of shame. She spun around, eyes wide with panic, grabbing at the screen like she could tear the truth away with her bare hands. "Turn it off. This is fake. It's all fake," she shouted, her voice cracking. "This is a setup." But no one moved. The room had gone quiet, except for the audio clip that continued to play. My father's tired but calm voice saying, "If anything happens to me, I want my daughter to have everything. She is the only one who never lied to me." And then, silence. The projector shut off, and the room was still. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone stared at Janice. She stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, hands shaking, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Her makeup had begun to smear under the heat of the lights, and the weight of the truth. "I didn't," she mumbled. A man from the crowd stepped forward, Mr. Hamilton, one of Dad's oldest investors. His voice was cold. "You stole from James, and you used his name to throw this event?" Another woman, Mrs. Caldwell, said softly, "How many of us gave money tonight thinking it was for James's legacy?" One by one, guests began to murmur. The whispers grew louder. "She's a liar. She cheated him. She planned this whole thing for herself." Janice tried to step forward, but the crowd parted away from her like she carried a disease. She turned to me, eyes filled with hatred. "You did this." I didn't flinch. I just said, "No, you did this to yourself." Suddenly, security appeared at the side of the room, two uniformed men who had been hired for the event. I turned to them. "She's been stealing from my father's accounts for years. Everything you just saw is real. You'll want to call the police." The two guards looked at each other, then one of them pulled out a phone. Janice backed away. "You can't arrest me. This is my house, my event, my—" "No," I said, cutting her off. "This is my father's house, and you just lost everything you never earned." That's when she did something I'll never forget. She rushed at me. Her heels clacked loudly against the floor, as she lunged toward me, her hands reaching for my neck, her face twisted in fury. But before she could touch me, Lou stepped in between us. He held out his arm, and pushed her back like she was nothing more than a gust of wind. She stumbled, fell to the floor. The room gasped, and for a few seconds, she just sat there, breathing heavy, sweating, alone. No one moved to help her, not one hand reached out, not one word was spoken in her defense. The police arrived 15 minutes later. She tried to scream and fight when they took her outside, but her voice was hoarse now. She looked smaller, weaker, like the mask had finally cracked. They placed her in the back of the squad car, and as they shut the door, she locked eyes with me through the window, and I smiled. But that was just the beginning. The charity gala was covered in every major paper the next day. The Widow's Web, Janice Montgomery, exposed at late husband's gala. The video Lou and I prepared had gone viral. We'd posted it to my father's old company website, right after the event. The comments were brutal. Her friends disappeared. Her lawyers dropped her. Even Trevor Baines, the man she stole for, ghosted her the moment the story broke. But what came next? That was even better. After the police took Janice away, I received a call the next morning from the family's accountant. He was kind, older. He'd worked with my father for over 20 years. "I was told to wait until the truth came out," he said. "Now that it has, I can give you the final documents your father left for you." He handed me a sealed envelope later that day. Inside was a letter from my dad. "If you're reading this, then I did the right thing. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Janice thought she could take everything, but I made sure you'd always be protected. You were never useless. You were my heart." There were also updated documents showing that not only did I inherit the estate, but the majority of his business shares, stocks and investments. Janice had tried to write herself into his world, but my father, he wrote her out long before his final breath. Still, I didn't stop there. I had one more move to make, and it involved Trevor Baines. Lou and I tracked him down to a high-rise apartment across the country. He lived in a place he couldn't afford without Janice's stolen money, so I sent him a letter. Simple, polite, just 3 words. I know everything. Then I waited. A week passed. Then one morning, I found a brown envelope slipped under my door. Inside were photos, emails, proof that Trevor wasn't just involved, he was the one pushing Janice to steal more. He had coached her, threatened her, manipulated her. He was the puppet master. And now, I had the strings. But I wasn't going to report him yet. No, Trevor was going to help me do one last thing, something that would make the entire world see the truth, and I knew just where to do it. That's when I bought a full-page ad in the Sunday Times. And what did I put in that ad? Would send shockwaves through the entire city. The Sunday Times hit every doorstep by 7 a.m. By 7:15, my phone exploded. By 8 a.m., news vans were already circling the block outside my father's estate, because there, in bold black letters on a full-page ad, was a headline that made even the most hardened coffee drinkers spill their cups. The man who stole from a dying father, the secret affair, the stolen millions, and the lies that funded a luxury life. And right under it, a blown-up picture of Trevor Baines and Janice on a beach vacation in Turks and Caicos, one that was paid for with my father's money, while he lay in a hospital bed back home. I included screenshots of emails, dates, bank transfers, video stills from a private investigator I'd hired months before the gala. I even included the line from one of Trevor's emails to Janice that read, "Once he's gone, we can move everything to the offshore account and disappear." Now the city knew everything. And I still wasn't done, because inside that same paper was a QR code. When scanned, it led to a site called James's Real Legacy, built by Lou and me. It was clean, simple, and packed with everything the media didn't cover. The truth, my father's charity work, the causes he supported, the letters he wrote to me, and a full breakdown of how Janice and Trevor funneled nearly $5 million into hidden accounts overseas. By noon, the Attorney General's office made a statement. By 3 p.m., an official investigation was launched, and by 6 p.m., Trevor's face was all over the evening news. Janice had been silent since the arrest, but Trevor, he cracked in 2 days. He was caught trying to flee the state with a duffel bag full of cash, and his passport stuffed in a sock. They dragged him out of a motel 2 towns over and charged him with fraud, theft, and conspiracy. I watched it all on TV, sitting in the same leather chair my father once sat in. But the strange thing? It didn't feel like victory yet. Something still hung in the air, a question I couldn't shake. Why did she hate me so much? Why did Janice go through all that trouble? What did I ever do to her? The answer came 2 nights later. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to. A voice on the other end said, "You don't know me, but I know everything about Janice. I think you deserve the truth." He told me to meet him at a small diner just outside town. I went the next morning. The place was nearly empty. A man in his early 60s sat at a corner booth, sipping black coffee. He had sad eyes and a soft voice. "My name's Howard," he said. "I used to be married to Janice." My heart thudded. "What?" He nodded. "A long time ago, before she met your father, we had a son, Matthew." I leaned forward, confused. "She never mentioned a child," I said. "That's because he died when he was 5. My stomach twisted. Howard looked down at his coffee. "It was an accident, a fire." Janice was never the same after that. She blamed herself. She blamed me. And then, she started blaming everyone. I listened quietly, as he told me more. How Janice fell into debt. How she tried to scam insurance. How she used men to get ahead. And then, how she met my father. She saw your dad as a second chance. Not for love, but for money, safety, control. And when you came into the picture, she saw you as the thing that could ruin all of that. I sat back, breath caught in my throat. All this time, I thought she hated me because I reminded her of someone else. But really, I reminded her of everything she lost. Howard gave me a box before he left. Inside were old pictures of Janice holding a little boy with curly blonde hair, smiling. Before the bitterness, it didn't excuse what she did, but it explained it. I put the box away. I didn't need it anymore. because now, it was time to finish what I started. Janice's trial began 3 weeks later. The courthouse was packed. News reporters lined the sidewalks. I walked in quietly, dressed in black, holding a small journal, my father's journal. I was called to the stand midway through. I spoke calmly, clearly. I read a letter my father wrote just a month before he passed, one he never got to send. It read, "Janice, if you're reading this, then the truth finally caught up with you. I wanted to believe in you. I truly did. But my daughter never gave me a reason to doubt her. You did. And now, I hope you understand that love isn't about what you take, it's about what you give. And you gave me nothing but pain." The courtroom was still when I finished. Janice didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked down, like she had nothing left to fight for. The judge sentenced her to 12 years. Trevor got 15. The judge sentenced her to 12 years. Trevor got 15. I walked out of that courtroom into the sunshine, took a deep breath, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. But I wasn't done honoring my father. No, because there was one last thing he wanted to do, and I had the power to make it happen now. That's why I picked up the phone that same afternoon, called the city board, and said, "I'm ready to build the youth center my father dreamed of, and I'm going to name it after the one person who never gave up on him." The board member asked, "Who's that?" I smiled. "Me." It started with an empty lot, and a dream. That lot sat on the corner of Brentley and Hodge Avenue, a place most people avoided after dark. Broken glass, cracked sidewalks, graffiti that stretched across half the buildings like war paint. But it was also the place my father talked about the most. He used to say, "A kid can't dream if he doesn't feel safe. We have to give them a place where they matter." So I did. With the funds the court returned from the stolen accounts, and the rest from my inheritance, we broke ground on the James Whitmore Youth Center just 4 months after the trial. We cleared the lot, rebuilt the playground, added classrooms, a gym, a library with comfy beanbags, and shelves full of books, and every room had a mural, each one painted by local kids, telling their own stories in wild, beautiful colors. It was everything my dad wanted, and everything Janice had tried to destroy. Funny thing was, even after she lost everything, I still heard whispers. Some said Janice was writing a book from prison, others claimed Trevor was trying to cut a deal with a podcast to tell his side, but none of it mattered, because while they plotted their sad little comebacks, the city was rallying behind something real. We held a soft opening of the youth center in June. Hundreds came, kids from every block, mothers with strollers, even old Mr. Dooley, the grump who never smiled, showed up with cupcakes and a tear in his eye. Lou stood beside me, wearing a bright green shirt that said, "Love Bills." She squeezed my hand and said, "He'd be so proud of you." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. But the moment that stuck with me the most. A little boy, maybe 8 or 9, walked up to the dedication wall. He stared at my father's picture, then turned to me and said, "Was that your dad?" "Yeah," I whispered. "He looks nice." The boy said, "Thanks for building this. I'm gonna bring my sister next time." I smiled and said, "You can bring the whole neighborhood." That night, I sat alone in the reading room, the sun setting through the glass windows. I pulled out my dad's journal and flipped to the last page. There, in faded ink, was a simple line, "If you're reading this, you already know. Revenge isn't fire, it's light. Use it to show the way." I closed the book and looked out at the horizon. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. I paused, hesitated, then answered. A shaky voice whispered, "I want to talk, please. Just one time." It was Janice, from prison. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. I don't sleep anymore. I keep thinking about what I did." I didn't say anything at first. Then I asked, "Why now?" "Because you built something beautiful," she said, her voice cracking. "And all I ever built was lies." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "I didn't build it for you. I built it in spite of you." Click. I hung up. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. I had nothing left to say to her. But the world was still listening, and it was time to speak up. That's why 2 weeks later, I walked into the City Hall Council chamber and stepped up to the mic during public comments. "I'm not here to ask for more money," I began. "I'm not here to shame anyone either. I'm here to offer a challenge." The room leaned in. "I want to start a program, city-funded, to mentor girls from hard places, to teach them leadership, self-worth, and resilience. I want to call it the Steadfast Project, because no matter what life throws at them, they'll know how to stand. Applause erupted. Even the stone-faced mayor smiled, and in that moment, I knew my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, reclaiming, restoring, and Janice, she became a cautionary tale. A reminder of what happens when you let bitterness rot your soul. Trevor? He tried to go on that podcast. It aired for a week, before the network got flooded with angry emails and pulled the episode. Nobody wanted to hear the villain cry victim. The world had already chosen the real hero. But life has a funny way of circling back, because just when I thought everything had settled, a letter arrived. No return address, no name, just a single sentence typed neatly on thick paper. You still don't know everything about your father, but I can help you. I read it twice, then 3 more times, because suddenly, I remembered something, that last storage unit Dad paid for, the one no one ever opened, and the missing pages from his journal. Maybe, just maybe, the past still had one more secret left to tell. I stood outside the rusty unit, key in hand, heart pounding like a drum. The sky above had darkened, storm clouds rolling in like a warning. The letter still sat in my jacket pocket, burning against my chest. You still don't know everything about your father, but I can help you. It was signed with just a symbol, a small clover. Weird. I didn't wait any longer. The key turned with a click, and the heavy door groaned open. Dust poured out, thick and musty. The room was packed with boxes, some labeled with simple black markers, old clinic, legal docs, photos. But one box sat by itself, no label, just a gold ribbon, wrapped loosely around the top. I knelt and opened it. Inside, there was only one thing, a small recorder. I pressed play, and my father's voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, you've done more than I ever could have imagined. You faced them, you've endured, and I'm sorry for the pain you had to carry. I froze, my eyes watered. He continued, there's something I never told anyone, not even your mother. When Janice came into my life, I was already dying. The doctors had told me, and I kept it secret to protect you. But I also made a mistake. I let guilt guide me. I married someone I thought would look after you when I was gone. Instead, she looked after herself. He paused. I added the clause to the will a year before I passed. I knew if she ever tried to push you out, she'd be the one losing everything. And I left you one more thing. The recorder beeped, and then silence. I didn't understand, but when I looked under the recorder, I found a thin leather folder. Inside was a deed to the land the youth center stood on, fully paid, in my name. A note paper clipped to it said, one day, people will try to take credit for what you built, but you'll always know, this was yours, from the start. I laughed, then I cried, because for the first time in years, I felt whole. The next few months flew by. The youth center exploded with life. Kids lined up before school, and stayed late into the evening. We added a mentorship wing, computers, even a rooftop garden. And me? I started teaching self-defense and life skills classes. Turns out, Lou was great with art therapy, and she joined me full-time. Her smile became the building's logo. But the world still moved. Trevor was denied parole. Janice tried to sue from prison. The court laughed her out. She ended up in solitary for 6 weeks after throwing a chair during the hearing. The same chair her lawyer tried to sit in. I didn't even attend. I was too busy handing out ice cream at the youth center's summer fair. One night, while locking up, I saw a group of teenagers sitting outside, talking about their dreams. One wanted to be a vet, another, a mechanic. One girl said she wanted to be the boss of everything. I smiled and said, you already are. She laughed. You sound like someone who's been through stuff. I just nodded, and said, I've had my share. Then I walked home under the stars, my father's words still echoing. Revenge isn't fire, it's light. Years later, they dedicated a mural on the side of the youth center. Huge, bright, alive with color. It showed a little girl holding a broken crown, lifting it to a sky full of stars. At the bottom, the words were painted in bold. She turned pain into power. And beneath that, my name. I didn't cry. I didn't have to, because I knew I'd already gotten the best revenge of all. A life built in truth, a legacy that mattered, and the silence of those who tried to bury me, because now, they had to watch me bloom.